What is up guys, this is Luke Hill for Kit Guru, and in this one we're taking a look at the Ryzen 7 5800X. This is AMD's 8-core single CCX Zen 3 chip that's looking to become the 8-core performance king. Can it live up to that tag? Or does the price look a little bit on the high side? Let's take a closer look. But before we take a closer look, if you like what we do here at Kit Guru, make sure you check out the written review to help us out. You can like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, that helps us grow. And you can let us know your feedback in the comment section down below. Let's jump back into it. I'm going to start off by saying that we've already checked out Zen 3 and the Ryzen 9 form, so the 16 and the 12 core chip. So if you want more details on the architecture and the main Zen 3 differences versus Zen 2 and versus Intel, check out that review. Keeping it concise, the Ryzen 7 5800X is an 8-core 16-thread chip. It uses a single 8-core CCX, and that's obviously Zen 3 architecture. The base frequency is 3.8 GHz with a boost of up to 4.7 GHz, so a little bit slower than the Ryzen 9 chips on the maximum boost frequency, as we typically see from AMD. You've got a 105 watt TDP and it comes without a bundled cooler, which is a decision I'm perfectly fine with for this caliber of chip. It uses the same TSMC 7nm process node and it has 32 megabytes of L3 cache and 4 megabytes of level 2 cache. And of course that 32 megs of L3 cache is because it's a single CCX design as opposed to the dual CCX design used on the Ryzen 9 chips of both the 12 core and the 16 core, which get you 64 megs of L3 cache. And then price wise, it's £420 street availability here in the UK. And I say availability in the modest sense because we know supply is very limited at the moment. Of course, the $50 price increase has been a major talking point, and it has been since the launch a few days ago. Now, $50 on a $750 chip going up to a $799 chip is pretty much fine. However, $50 extra on a $399 chip going up to $449 is a larger proportional increase. So this $50 increase does give some tough competition to the Ryzen 7 5800X, both from AMD's own lineup for Zen 2 and Zen 3, and then also from Intel's 10th gen Comet Lake lineup. Anyway, that's the introduction to the Ryzen 7 5800X. Let's have a look at some of the competition. So the old Zen 2 12-core chips, the 3900X and the 3900XT, come in at about £20 to £30 more expensive than the 5800X, and that makes them valid competitors on the face of it from a productivity perspective. And then on the Intel side of things, we have the Core i7 10700K that retails for about £370 here in the UK. Most notably though, is the competition offered up by the Intel Core i9 10850K. And I'm just going to grab that off the shelf from behind me. That was lucky. All my years of playing football have clearly come in well with the catching. So basically the Core i9 10850K is fundamentally a Core i9 10900K. It's still 10 cores, 20 threads, 10th gen architecture, 14 plus process node, but it just comes in at 100 megahertz slower than the 10900K, and importantly, it comes in at about £110 cheaper. So this Core i9 10850K 10-core chip actually retails for about £440 in the UK. That makes it £20 more expensive than the Ryzen 7 5800X, but it does have a slight frequency advantage and also a core count advantage. However, you are trading off the benefits of the AM4 platform and Gen 4 PCIe Express connectivity, and also the preferential Zen 3 architecture, which does seem to be higher from an IPC perspective, significantly higher. So that's going to be an interesting battle that we're going to be focusing on throughout this review. Let's jump in and have a closer look at the test system. Creating the heart of our test system are the X570 motherboards that we're using. Our primary testing was handled on the Asus ROG Crosshair 8 Hero using BIOS 2311, which is a GISA 1100 patch B. And we didn't use the patch C BIOS because it's actually in beta form, and we tested it out and it didn't work all that well in our testing. We also used the Gigabyte X570 Aorus Extreme for some additional validation testing, just to make sure we're happy with the numbers that we're seeing from the Asus motherboard. Memory comes in the form of a 2x16 gig 3600 MHz C16 kit from Corsair, and that's Vengeance LPX DDR4. The underlying ICs are Samsung BDI ICs, and these are dual rank modules. Cooling comes in the form of a Fractal 280mm AIO with 1600 RPM fan speeds. Our graphics card of choice is the Gigabyte RTX 3080 Eagle OC. So this triple fan factory overclocked graphics card is a performance powerhouse and will deliver the frame rates necessary for us to identify performance differences between these high-end processors on offer. The power supply is the Seasonic Prime TX1000 1 kilowatt titanium rated unit. For our Intel test system, we use identical hardware across the board. However, we obviously switch out the motherboard, and this is to an MSI Meg Z490 Ace motherboard. Importantly, when we apply XMP on the motherboard and basically just build the system, apply XMP as a general user, even an enthusiast user would, then that applies the forced turbo conditions on the Core i9 and Core i7 chip. So specifically for the Core i9 10850K, that allows it to run at 4.8 GHz all core. And I guess at that point it makes perfect sense to advise you to head on over to the KitGuru website, where you can see the written article highlighting our test procedures, our comparison test hardware, how we run the AMD chips, how we run the Intel chips, the turbo conditions on the Intel chips, the overclocked conditions on the chips when they're there. All the details are over there. And of course, if you have any further questions, post them in the comment section down below. But anyway, let's jump into the testing, and we'll start with clock speeds. In terms of overclocking, we managed to push the Ryzen 7 5800X to 4.7 GHz all-core using an actual delivered voltage under load of about 1.32 to 1.34 volts. We could probably tune it down a bit further, but it was a nice quick and dirty overclock that delivered the frequency we were targeting, so we carried on. 4.7 GHz all-core is a solid result, and it matches what we saw from the bigger Ryzen 9 parts. We were able to boot into Windows a little bit higher, but we couldn't get stability. But with more tweaking and more tuning, you may be able to push a little bit further than 4.7. We also did a quick test on Precision Boost Overdrive. We just didn't really see any big benefit, and that's because it was already running very fast with Precision Boost out of the box. So PBO was kind of pointless in our specific use case. And the reason for that is because the chip simply didn't really need the additional power headroom that PBO afforded to it. Anyway, let's jump on into the performance results. The Ryzen 7 5800X delivers a performance lead of a sizable 24% versus the 8-core Intel i7 10700K. That's a significant performance boost for 8 cores versus 8 cores and highlights the architectural proficiency of Zen 3. Versus the slightly more expensive Core i9 10850K, it is Intel's chip that opens up a slim lead of 2% over the 5800X. That margin of victory is not worth the price increase for the Intel part, however. And if you look at the £90 more expensive Ryzen 9 5900X, AMD's 12-core chip leads the 5800X by a huge 40% margin. Clearly, the Zen 2 and Zen 3 12-core offerings present themselves as far better options in this test compared to the 5800X given the pricing. We see the 8-core Zen 3 chip hitting around 4.55 GHz all-core when loaded using Cinebench. 4.55 GHz on an 8-core AMD chip is a good all-core result, and it's about 300 MHz higher than what we saw from the 8-core Zen 2 Ryzen 7 3800 XT, and about 400 to 500 MHz higher than what we saw from the 8-core Zen 2 Ryzen 3000X launch processors. 4.55 GHz also puts the 5800X around 100 to 150 MHz higher than the Ryzen 9 5900X in terms of all-core boost clocks. Given the reduced maximum boost clocks, it comes as no surprise to see the 5800X scoring slightly below its Ryzen 9 brothers. The 10700K is beaten by 22%, and the 10850K is bested by 21%. The gains versus Zen 2 are also large. This gives some food for thought to productivity-minded users leaning towards the 3900X or 3900XT for multi-threaded workloads, as the 5800X is faster in lightly threaded tasks. Zen 3 really has proven to be superb architectural design with fantastic IPC. Continuing the trend that we saw with the Ryzen 9 5000 series processors, the 5800X actually performs above its rated or quoted maximum boost clock of 4.7 GHz. We often saw the chip hitting about 4.85 GHz according to HWinfo. Blender is another domain where an 8-core processor can make sense for hobbyist users. The 8-core Zen 3 chip's performance is closer to that of the Intel Core i9 10850K, though Intel's £20 more expensive 10-core processor is 30 seconds quicker and even retains its lead when the Zen 3 5800X is manually overclocked. If you were looking at purchasing the 5800X for multi-threaded Blender usage, the 12-core Zen 2 offerings look to be more valuable solutions at the price point. The Ryzen 7 5800X shows another strong performance victory of 25% over the cheaper Core i7 10700K in V-Ray. Versus the more expensive Core i9 10850K, the 5800X provides roughly a performance tie by showing a slightly lower score at stock and a within error margin difference when overclocked. Tough competition, however, comes from the 12-core Ryzens. In this use case, those 12-core Zen 2 and Zen 3 chips both seem like better value options than the Ryzen 7 5800X, but that depends on how strict your budget is, of course. In 7-zip's compression workload, the 8-core Zen 3 chip beats the 10850K by 3% and the 10700K by 22%. The 12-core Ryzens yet again prove tough competitors though, especially with the £510 Ryzen 9 5900X offering 30% faster performance. In decompression, the Ryzen 7 5800X is 4% quicker than the Core i9 10850K and 33% better than the 10700K. The trend continues whereby the 12-core Ryzens are notably faster than the 5800X, and the Ryzen 9 5900X's 48% performance uplift looks to be excellent value for the 21% higher price. All cores on the Ryzen 7 5800X are utilised well in our Handbrake X264 workload. This allows the 8-core Zen 3 processor to offer almost the same level of performance as Intel's pricier 10-core 10850K. The 5900X is 37% faster, and the 3900 XT is 17% quicker. Our Handbrake X265 workload shows strong preference for Zen 3's architecture. This allows the 5800X to open up a performance lead versus both the Core i9 10850K and the Core i7 10700K. This time, the Zen 3 advancements make none of the Zen 2 competitors worthy of similar performance. Memory performance is as we expect from a single CCD Zen processor. You get reduced overall memory bandwidth versus the dual CCD Ryzen 9 chips. You also get the half-speed write performance that is common for single CCD Ryzen processors on Zen 2 and Zen 3. F1 2020 at 1080p sees the Ryzen 7 5800X delivering the same promising numbers as the Ryzen 9 siblings, and represents basically the same performance as the Core i7 10700K. If you want to know how the 10850K will perform, just look at the Core i9 10900K numbers, because it's basically the same 10-core Intel chip, minus a 100MHz offset. At 1440p, the performance is still strong, with AMD Zen 3 8-core basically matching the chart toppers when accounting for error and variance margins. Realistically though, the cheaper Ryzen 5 5600X is just as good here. Zen 3 delivers a performance win in GTA 5. This old and historically Intel favouring title plays very well on Zen 3, as proven by the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9 test results. Compared to the 10700K, AMD's 5800X is slightly faster on average. Even versus the Core i9 10900K, which is basically the same as the 10850K, the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X manages to hold its own very well. At 1440p, the 5800X delivers a solid 120 FPS average and continues to outperform the Core i7 10700K and roughly matches the Core i9 10900K. Ryzen 5 5600X is still a good option in GTA 5, but the 5800X is very slightly faster. Metro Exodus sees the 5800X matching the other Zen 3 chips, including the cheaper Ryzen 5 5600X. Intel's Core i7 10700K offers the same performance as the 5800X, but the 10-core Comet Lake part is a little faster on average. Compared to Zen 2 competitors, including the 12-core 3900 XT, AMD's Ryzen 7 5800X performance uplift is significant and useful given the frame rate range. 1440p fares a little better on an Intel test system, and here the Core i7 10700K opens up a small but measurable performance lead versus Ryzen 7 5800X. Red Dead Redemption 2 using our test setup continues to show strong preference for Intel Comet Lake chips. Here the 10700K beats the 5800X by a measurable and useful margin. AMD's 8-core chip does, however, match the other Zen 3 parts, including the cheaper Ryzen 5 5600X. At 1440p, the trend holds consistent, and this time the performance uplift from Zen 2 to Zen 3 is compressed heavily. Shadow of the Tomb Raider performs well on Zen 3, and the Ryzen 7 5800X continues that trend. AMD's 8-core chip with 32 megs of L3 cache cannot match the Ryzen 9 performance levels, but it does offer notably higher performance than the Core i7 10700K and also Ryzen 5 5600X. At 1440p, the performance differences are heavily compressed, and now the Ryzen 7 5800X's performance improvement versus the Intel Comet Lake competitor is hard to see in practice. The jump from Zen 2 to Zen 3 though is still sizable. The Division 2 sees Ryzen 7 5800X level in the Core i7 10700K performance on average, and the 10900K is within margin of error. It's also worth noting that AMD's cheaper Ryzen 5 5600X is just as good as the 5800X at 1080p. Cranked up to 1440p, performance from the 5800X is as good as the Intel Comet Lake competitors, but again the 5600X proves to keep pace with its more expensive 8-core sibling. If we summarise the gaming performance, AMD's Ryzen 7 5800X performs well throughout our suite of testing and happily trades blow with the Intel Comet Lake competitors. Another note is that the performance uplift versus Zen 2 is sizable and consistent. Of course, the real gaming challenger comes from the Ryzen 5 5600X, as this delivers pretty much similar performance as the Ryzen 7 5800X, but it does so while costing less, so you can pump more money into a graphics card. And we still believe that right now 6 cores and 12 threads is perfectly fine for a solid gaming experience, even with high-end graphics cards like the RTX 3080 that we used. The 8-core Ryzen 7 5800X uses just about 100% of its 142 watt PPT allowance on our test motherboards. The caveat here is that the power budget for the 5800X is used to boost to higher operating frequencies using higher voltages than the Zen 3 Ryzen 9s. That's why we see higher power consumption from the 16-thread chip, despite its core count deficit. Compared to the Intel Comet Lake chips, the Ryzen 7 5800X matches the Core i7-10700K power draw, but offers significantly higher productivity performance. The 5800X is closer to the 20-thread Core i9-10850K in terms of performance, but AMD's part operates around 45 watts lower wall power draw under load. Overclocking to 4.7 GHz adds only 12 watts to our measured load power draw. This is a slim increase as the 8-core chip already runs at high frequency out of the box. 8 Zen 3 cores and reasonable power draw levels manage to one-up Intel's Comet Lake 8 and 10-core chips in our Cinebench-based power efficiency chart. AMD stretches the Ryzen 7's power budget to deliver higher operating clocks, and this reduces the efficiency versus alternative Zen 2 and Zen 3 competitors. Cinebench weighted performance value shows a reasonable offering from the Ryzen 7 5800X. Intel's £20 more expensive and slightly faster Core i9-10850K offers a similar level of value, but the Core i7-10700K does not keep trend. It comes as no surprise to see the Ryzen 7 beating AMD's Halo 16-core offerings in terms of value. However, the 12-core Ryzen 9 5900X and 3900XT both offer better performance and better value, albeit at slightly higher price points. Load temperatures from the Ryzen 7 5800X were high even when placed under a 280mm all-in-one liquid cooler with 1600 RPM fans. This is because the chip aggressively increases voltage to achieve the higher core clocks afforded by its healthy 142 watt power budget. Just over 80 degrees Celsius under stock load conditions implies the requirement for high-end cooling, but of course, AMD's smart precision boost algorithm will adjust the operating voltages and clock speeds based on the temperature readings that are dictated by the cooling capacity available. Overclocking to 4.7 GHz using around 1.32 to 1.34 volts resulted in load temperatures just shy of 90 degrees Celsius. This is high, but there's evidently more room for better tuning the overclock voltage beyond the safe bet that we went for in our testing. Clearly, the temperatures are no cause for concern, but it is interesting to note how thermal density looks to be affecting the temperature behaviour of this processor. There we have it. The Ryzen 7 5800X delivers a good balance between gaming and productivity performance. The 8-core part often punches well above its core count numbers in terms of productivity performance, and that's because of the speed and the efficiency and the IPC gains from the Zen 3 architecture, which continues to prove to be fundamentally superb. It's responsible for closing the gap quite significantly versus a 25% core count increase on the Intel 10-core competitors. And power and efficiency scores are an area where AMD just continues to dominate. We still see TSMC 7nm delivering the goods, especially when backed up with the smart Zen 3 architecture. With all that said, in the UK though, the price is high, $420. So I think that'll do it. If we finish this off, then the Ryzen 7 5800X offers really well balanced performance, but its value and its pricing gives it really quite a tough position to fight in the market. If you're only interested in gaming, the Ryzen 5 5600X with its £140 or roughly 33% price decrease versus the Ryzen 7 is a better buy. That £140 will be spent on a better graphics card which will deliver a superior gaming situation for you. And if you're primarily productivity focused, then spending maybe £20 to £30 extra on the 12-core Zen 2 chips is probably going to be perhaps a better solution, depending on your workload of course. And then again, if you need the Zen 3 architectural improvements, then spending £90 or 21% extra to get 50% more cores from the Ryzen 9 5900X looks like a pretty reasonable solution. And then on the Intel side of things, the Core i9-10850K is about £20 more expensive, and it's quite a tough competitor. I'd say the Ryzen 7 5800X does hold its own versus the Intel 10-core chip, but it is a valid competitor. It's not like with the Ryzen 9 chips where we saw them blasting their Intel competitors out of the park in terms of overall performance and value. That's not the case here. So the Intel competitor at this price point, at least in the UK market, does seem to give it slightly tough competition. So put simply, we think the Ryzen 7 5800X is a really good, well-balanced chip. It offers good productivity performance, good gaming performance, but I would have liked to see the price a little bit cheaper so that the value picture would have been more preferential for the Ryzen 7 chip. It looks like AMD is trying to upsell you to the Ryzen 9, and that is a really good chip, and we'd probably recommend it if this is what you were looking at initially, if you can find stock of course. But if you have a hard limit of £450 to sell, then while the Ryzen 7 5800X does have stiff competition from the Comet Lake Core i9 10-core, and also from some of the older Zen 2 12-core parts, then perhaps the balance of great gaming performance, good productivity performance, and the upgrade path through Zen 3 and through the AM4 platform, perhaps that works for you. If it does, let us know in the comments section down below. So I've been Luke Hill for Kit Guru. Thank you for watching this video review of the Ryzen 7 5800X. Let us know what you think in the comment section down below. Is this the chip for you? Do you want Zen 3? Do you want 8 cores? And are you happy to pay up for it? Or are you going to go for the cheaper Ryzen 5 5600X? Or are you going to go for the more expensive Ryzen 9 chips? Let us know in the comment section down below. If you want more details, head on over to the Kit Guru website and read the written review there. That really helps us out. If you want to support us, check out our Patreon page and you can buy a cool t-shirt like this from our merch store. And of course, do all the YouTube things like subscribe, bell icon, and we will see you in the next one.